Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Me, Rosanna, Lockwood, sitting in the big chair for the big man this evening. Now, more than 120 lawyers have banded together in England to refuse to prosecute climate protesters such as Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain and Extinction Rebellion, whose tactics include gluing themselves to roads to stop traffic. Now, the group's lawyers are responsible is made up of barristers, solicitors and academics, but the declaration breaks their professional code of conduct, which means that they have to keep personal politics out of their job. Well, this is going to be a fascinating discussion, isn't it? Joining me in the studio, Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at Net Zero Watch, activist Donnachadh McCarthy, and Paul Powlesland, a lawyer refusing to prosecute climate protesters. Paul, let's start with you, seeing as you're part of this group, this 120. Just lay out to us what it is you're hoping to achieve and what you've all agreed.
Well, there's actually two parts to it. So the first is the one that's taken, I think, more of the headlines, which is the non-prosecution of peaceful climate activists. And the second is not helping to facilitate new fossil fuel expansion projects. And actually, that's actually more relevant to me because I'm a civil law barrister, so I actually don't do criminal prosecution. So that second one is more my thing. So
that I understand. So, for example, if Shell or BP asked you to act on their behalf in a court case, you'd say, sorry, no, I'm not going to do that based on being part of this group, based on my ethics.
No, it's not necessarily about representing them at all. So, for instance, if the head of an oil company was on criminal prosecution for corporate manslaughter or something, then we would represent them. It's very specifically not assisting them with new fossil fuel expansion projects because we know what the consequences of those projects will be because the IPCC has told us. And so it's the subtle distinction between, subtle but important distinction between we will represent people who are accused of a crime, but we won't help them to continue committing that crime. And that's a really important distinction.
And give us a sense of why this contravenes your rules as a barrister, because isn't it the case that you're not allowed to let sort of ethics, well, ethics is obviously important to your job, but personal politics interfere with people's right to defence?
Yeah, I should just say that the Bar Standards Board hasn't actually told me if it is or isn't allowed yet. I've written a letter saying I think it's actually probably OK because I haven't actually refused any instructions yet, but it may be in breach. We're not quite sure yet. But it does. I think it's fair to say that it does contravene a principle that lawyers hold highly, which is that we should represent anyone. But we think, firstly, that the climate crisis is so serious that these two principles need to be upheld, and also that we need to reweight the scales a bit. The fact is that lawyers acting for fossil fuel companies have helped facilitate 1.6 trillion worth of new fossil fuel projects since 2017, since the Paris Agreement. And how much have those lawyers acted for climate protests or those trying to stop the climate crisis? Very, very few. So what this declaration does is just help to tip the scales back a little bit.
Good context. I want to come back to you to find out how that's working in practice. And also, I think the Bar Association is going to find out this evening that you're on television talking about it.
I've written a letter telling them what I've done, so they're fully aware.
Donnachadh and Harry, I want to come to you both, because, Harry, you're with a head of policy at Net Zero Watch. Now, this organisation talks a lot about net zero and kind of, I think it's fair to say, sort of campaigns against the concept of net zero. When you listen to Paul describe why he doesn't want to act for people that expand fossil fuels, can't you understand that argument?
I think this is incredibly irresponsible because lawyers are there to underpin the legal system. What are we fighting to save if you are a climate activist? Hopefully a flourishing society. And we're very fortunate in this country to actually benefit from trust in the rule of law, and anyone who can find themselves in a court of law should be able to expect that the court system is going to treat them without any suggestion that personal political views will come into this. So while I appreciate there are some qualifications here, I think it sends out the wrong message that actually the law depends on people's personal political views, when actually, you know, this is about judging whether people have breached the law. That is a matter for barristers to debate, and that's what they should stick to.
Donnachadh, I'll come to you on the climate activist shortly, but Paul, irresponsible of you?
No, and I think that's a slightly naive view of the way the legal system and justice system works. As I said before, what we're actually seeing is not that we're all equal before the courts. The fact is that almost all of your viewers out there do not have the money that would allow them to employ these lawyers that the fossil fuel companies are using. And let's be clear, the fossil fuel industry is one of the richest industries that has ever existed. Of course they're going to use their wealth to try and get lawyers to act in their interests. And that's what that's leading to is a situation where they are actually getting things weighted unfairly in their favour. And similarly with prosecution, it's not as simple as saying, oh, you've broken the law, everyone gets prosecuted equally. They do not. For instance, I live on a river where the water company is throwing sewage into the river illegally, completely illegally. They admit it, a serious crime. They've never been prosecuted because there is prosecutorial discretion, and that at the moment is being used much more against climate activists. People are being prosecuted for climate activism that simply wouldn't be prosecuted otherwise.
Let's speak about the climate activists. Donnachadh, coming to you because I know that you have your own activism and you also speak out on behalf of climate activists. Now, a lot of our viewers find it hard to find sympathy with Just Stop Oil and with Extinction Rebellion. I think you've probably seen some of the broadcasts from this network before on this and the arguments that do ensue because it's felt like the violence sometimes, the violent, non-peaceful protests lose the cause, lose people on the important topic, the no doubt important topic of climate change. So, is it not right that people who cause violent disruption...
Sorry,
violent.
You keep using the word violent.
To me...
Come on, Extinction Rebellion. That's a smear, and that's a smear on thousands of peaceful activists. Please don't do that. That's not a good way to approach this debate.
It's because we're talking about what is peaceful and what is not peaceful.
Yeah, if we want to talk
protest.
about violence, Extinction Rebellion has not injured a single person.
The
oil companies there's 33 million people were flooded in their homes in Pakistan. That's violence. There's 30 million people starving in the Sahel. That's violence. So when we're talking about the law, we need to go back to Nuremberg, because what Nuremberg said, if the lawyers and the judges are involved in perpetrating a great evil, then it is wrong for them to collude with the law. And I believe what these lawyers are doing that now, because this, to us, is a greater evil than what was perpetrated in the Second World War. The World Bank said that the climate crisis is greater than World War I, World War II, and the Great Recession put together. So the law at the moment defends the climate companies and the think tanks, and it prosecutes us. That's upside down, and that needs to be reversed.
I appreciate you contending me on the word violence. I'm going to contend you on likening apples and oranges, climate change, and the prosecution of climate change activists to the Nuremberg trials. I think equating human-directed genocide with the climate change agenda and what is happening in climate change, which I believe in, very much so, science-based climate change. I think that is, again, a very unhelpful comparison.
Do you know what the word existential means?
Of course.
Well, the word existential, I think, sounds cuddly. But when the UN Secretary-General says humanity is facing an existential crisis, he is saying the future of humanity is at stake. And what's happening at the moment is the law backs those who are threatening our existence, the oil companies and the think tanks, and it actually prosecutes us. And you talk about fairness in the law. When I'm in court, I can't afford a lawyer. When activists are in court at the moment, the judge is telling the activists we are not allowed to tell the jury why we're there, why we are putting our freedom on the line to actually save humanity. And that's why there needs to be a redress and rebalancing.
And I think your voices of climate activists do need to be heard. But I'm hearing, Harry, you've got some points to make here.
Well,
go on.
You're being prosecuted, Donnachadh, because you're breaking the law. We have laws in this country. We have to respect them. And let's be real here. They are putting lives at risk. Ambulances haven't been able to reach hospitals
that is not true.
Because of activists who have been blocking the roads.
That's a Daily Mail.
And there's been a number of cases where this is seriously impacting on the emergency services. And let's remember, it isn't cynical fossil fuel companies that just want to burn fossil fuels for the sake of it. Fossil fuels underpin so many of how we do things in the modern world. We wouldn't be able to keep our hospitals powered without fossil fuels. Yeah. We wouldn't be able to get to work. We wouldn't be able to power the studio.
I do understand that we do need energy. We're very reliant on it. But do you believe in climate change?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how would you like to see activism directed towards making people more aware of it?
I think sensible solutions like nuclear energy and solutions that keep energy affordable. Because actually, if energy prices rise, as we've seen over the course of the energy crisis, people will be thinking, this isn't going to improve my living standards. And actually, it's cheap technologies that will be much quicker.
We're agreed that actually we shouldn't be choosing expensive forms of energy. The cheapest form of energy at the moment is onshore wind. And we're the only country in the world that's banned it. Isn't that extraordinary? And this organisation lobbied in 2013 to actually stop the insulation programme. Lord Lawson, as part of his organisation, lobbied, and that meant that 9 million homes didn't have their homes insulated, and they paid the price this winter with not only with fuel poverty, but a lot of them with their lives, because 9,000 to 8,000 people die in Britain every year because their homes are not insulated. So I think this organisation, when we talk about the law, and he says we must obey the law, but the law backs him and not us. It actually allows...
Let's hear from the law. Let's round off just a bit by hearing from the law.
I don't think I should call the law, but...
What I'm hearing from both of these gentlemen, Donnachadh and Harry, is that we want to see leadership coming from elsewhere in society, other than just activists. You want to see companies, government, everyone else leading. So having a band of lawyers doing this, do you think you can make a difference?
I think it already has. I think it's inspired many other lawyers around the world. So other lawyers have contacted saying, people in the UK are doing this, we can do this too. And also other activists, when they see lawyers standing up and actually doing something on principle, on conscience, I think that has a real power to it. And also say, just in response to Harry's point about, yes, of course we need fossil fuels at the moment, but we need to begin the transition as soon as possible, which is why our declaration doesn't say we will never act for a fossil fuel company. It very specifically states we will not help them to do fossil fuel expansion, because we know from the IPCC what the consequences of that will be. So we can have fossil fuels now for the transition, but we need to start very quickly in that transition. And fossil fuel companies are deliberately obscuring and blocking that transition because it's in their monetary interest to do so, and they're using lawyers to do that.
If we don't see more oil and gas extraction and fund it, then we will see prices rise. And those price rises will cause
one argument, Harry, is prices and cost of living, and we are all feeling it. The other is the future of the planet and the future of our existence. Gentlemen, it's been fascinating. We've learnt a lot this evening. Great to have you debating this with us and teaching us about what lawyers are doing in all of this. Now, next tonight is woke culture. To blame for high taxes, former Prime Minister Liz Truss certainly seems to think so. I'll be diving into that next.